Hey guys, welcome to Health Science Explained. So this week I'm speaking to Chris Bryceson from Melbourne. So Chris graduated from La Trobe University with a double degree in health sciences and a master in physiotherapy practice. As well as being a physiotherapist, Chris is also an ASCA accredited level 1 strength and conditioning coach. And he works closely with elite athletes, powerlifters, and a lot of general population people to help reduce their pain levels and rehab their injuries. So Chris, I guess a good place to start would be, what would you see as kind of what's your conception of health? And then how do you see injuries disrupting that?
First of all, thanks for having me on, James. I'm really looking forward to this chat, mate, and keen to get into it. I suppose, yeah, I mean, as far as the role that injuries play in an overall picture of health, I mean, to me, in a really simple form, health is something that when we have optimal health, it allows us to live the lifestyle that we want to live and allows us to do the things that we want to do. And when I see people on a daily basis that are either injured or in pain for some sort of reason, it's the pain and injuries are stopping them doing the things that they want to be doing. You know, it's not generally that they come to me and it's the knee pain that's really bothering them. It's the fact that their knee pain is stopping them from being able to squat, or it's the fact that their ankle pain is stopping them from being able to run, or their shoulder pain stopping them from being able to play football, or their back pain stopping them from being able to lift up their kids and be a good parent. So I suppose that's sort of the view that I take when it comes to the role that injuries play in health, is that if we're in pain, if we're injured, that's going to stop us doing the things that we want to be doing in our life. We're not here for a very long time, unfortunately. So while we're here, we want to maximise our potential to live the lifestyle that we want, and we need to be in an optimal state of health for as much of our life as we possibly can to be able to do the things that we want to be doing.
Yeah, and I think it's often a case where I think a lot of people put up with pain sometimes for a decent amount of time, and they don't realize that sometimes it is solvable. And yeah, it is definitely a shame, and I totally agree. If you had to kind of sum up your approach to and obviously this is a very, very broad question, but like, what would you say are the big pillars for you that you would focus on? If someone comes to you with a certain injury, whether that's an acute injury or like say if they have chronic back pain, what would be the main things that you would focus on to bring them back to a place of health in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the single most important thing that I can provide a client, and that I mean, clients generally want when they're going to see a physiotherapist or any allied health practitioner for that matter, is education. I think there's a bit of a misconception that people go to a physio and the most important thing they're going to be getting is some hands-on treatment or a perfect solution to their problems in the forms of this beautifully structured rehabilitation program. And yes, those things are great, but the most important thing we can provide is education, is to actually be able to explain to someone why they're in pain, what are the contributing factors to their condition, and what they can actually do, what they need to do about it to take control of their own health and to improve themselves going forward. So I think that's number one, is being an educator as much as possible. And probably number two, is really taking an active approach to recovery. I've certainly got a bias towards exercise. I suppose the point of difference in my business is that I do run my business exclusively out of personal training studios. So I work closely with a pretty active population and work closely with what I consider to be some of the best PTs in Melbourne, where I practice. And so I think taking an active approach, not only for the clientele that I generally see, is really important because it tends to be a lot of my clients are biased towards that approach as well as me. But probably more importantly, there's just an overwhelming amount of published research and evidence to support the use of exercise as a first line treatment for the vast majority of musculoskeletal complaints. So from everything to back pain, shoulder pain, hip pain, knee pain, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, tendinopathy, soft tissue injuries, ligament injuries. I mean, the list goes on. There's just an overwhelming amount of research to suggest that exercise is the best way to manage these conditions. So I think if we can combine, for most people, a good education as well as sort of an active approach and using therapeutic exercise to help people, that would probably, sum up my approach as a whole.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that I think I often hear from physiotherapists is the hard part is, like, obviously I would assume you've got a pretty good understanding of, like, for instance, someone comes with patellofemoral pain. Like, you could give them 57 exercises to rehab that. But I guess the hard part is, and maybe the education plays a role here, is trying to actually get them to buy into it and believe that it's going to work, and then adhere to the actual exercises.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on, and I think that's so important, because you can prescribe the absolute world's best rehabilitation program, but if it doesn't actually make sense to someone in terms of, well, you're doing this exercise for this reason and this exercise for this reason, well, yeah, the adherence and the buy-in just isn't going to be there. So yeah, the best treatment on paper or in a textbook, or the best rehabilitation approach, like we said, doesn't mean much unless we're providing the proper education as to why that's important.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I guess one of the things with exercise is, assuming we can get someone to adhere to it. And I really like the idea of education playing a role there, where if someone can believe that this is going to work, like if I take an example, so I work as a health coach in a medical center, and I'm doing a similar thing where I'm obviously not trying to rehab injuries, but I am trying to get someone to exercise. And if I can explain to them how exercise will bring down their HbA1c, that will get them to exercise. If they know, like, what are I can get them to say out loud, like, what are the long-term consequences? And I do find if I can get them to understand that, then the adherence can be higher. But I guess one of the things is, when thinking about exercise, what do you see as the primary, why is this something that, like, you sort of self-identified, like, this is I have a bias toward exercise, and like, so do I, obviously. But like, why do you think you have that sort of lens, and what do you think it is about exercise that does something different to other like treatment modalities?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think my bias towards exercise is because, I mean, I would consider myself an evidence-based practitioner. That's the core value of my business, is to make sure that we're evidence-based and we're keeping up to date with research. And as I said, there's probably a harsh reality of what I do as a physiotherapist, and what a lot of different allied health professionals do, is that there's a lot of what we do that there's not solid, clear, concrete research evidence to say this is the best thing to do. There's so much grey, and there's not a lot of black and white, which can make our job challenging at times. But the one thing that does, sort of constantly, come to the front of our minds when we actually delve into the research, is exercise for musculoskeletal complaints. And as I said, the vast majority of people I deal with have some sort of musculoskeletal pain or injury. So I mean, yeah, that's the reason why primarily that I'd be biased towards exercise. I think the other thing as well is other different forms of treatment methods, things like manual therapy, hands-on treatment, or things like medication, or even things like activity modification, which all have their place. They probably don't have a great deal of additional benefits. Whereas if you're prescribing exercise to help treat someone's pain or help rehabilitate someone's injury, even if it's not necessarily the right exercise, even if it's not necessarily helping them, well, we know that exercise is going to have a whole vast array of general benefits as well, right? Exercise is going to stop the deconditioning process as we age. Exercise is going to help with our cardiovascular health. Exercise is going to help to minimize the risk of chronic disease down the track. So yeah, as I said, it's something that if we can be getting people moving and exercising more, even if it's not necessarily the absolute best thing to help with their pain or injuries, there's going to be additional benefits. So from that point of view, you can't really lose.
Yeah.
I suppose a couple of other thoughts is that we do see that exercise can have a hypoalgesic effect. Aerobic exercise, resistance exercise, any sort of exercise really can actually help to release pain-relieving endorphins in the body and basically inhibit our nervous system pathways that are responsible for producing pain. So it's not only additional benefits, but it actually does help to decrease pain as its own modality, where a lot of people probably don't see that. They think, okay, yes, if I get stronger down the track, my injury may be better, or if I get more mobility down the track, my injury may be better, but it can actually be along the way that can help to decrease pain. It's sort of really powerful in that aspect. So I mean, we could probably talk about that question for another hour. But that's a summary, I suppose.
Yeah, and in my experience, like, I've seen a very similar thing. So I have scoliosis, so I've got like a spinal fusion and all that stuff. So it's, you get a decent amount of chronic pain, but the biggest like modifier of that for me is, and I guess this is another thing I'd kind of like to get into, is like, so for me, the more exercise I do, no matter what that looks like, whether it's walking, lifting, whatever, up to a certain dose. So like, let's say if I'm lifting 6 times a week at like very high intensities all the time for like an hour and a half, I'm going to have more chronic pain than I would have if I didn't exercise. But if I do like 3 sessions of lifting a week, 4 sessions of lifting a week, good controlled sessions, I'm going to have lower chronic pain. And I guess but even if I go for walks, I'm going to have less chronic pain. So it's like exactly what you talked about. It totally relates to my actual life. And I guess the kind of question I had is, when you think about exercise, how much of it is, let's say someone has, I use the example of tendonitis in like the elbow joint or something like that. I'm not sure, but how much of the exercise for that would be, let's just get this joint moving and let's focus specifically on this joint, versus let's try and make you more active overall? Because let's say, for example, I know there's a lot of evidence around, well, I think there's a lot of evidence around, if someone is stronger generally, they're probably going to be healthier and maybe more resistant to injuries. Does that sound like, yeah, like what's the kind of your thought pattern when it comes to, let's focus on just this specific joint or this specific problem, versus, hey, can you try to get stronger overall?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a mix. So, I mean, you've got to think about the way and the mechanisms in which prescribed therapeutic exercise is actually going to work. In the case of, an elbow tendinopathy, say a tennis elbow or a golfer's elbow that you sort of just brought up there. Well, we know the research for tendinopathy tells us that strengthening is the best thing that we can do for it. And generally that's because when we get a tendinopathy, there's basically an imbalance between the loading capacity of that tendon and the loads that we're asking it to tolerate on a daily basis. So there's got to be an aspect of, well, let's remove the things that are painful for a time being or modify them in some way to give us a window of opportunity to build up as much strength as we possibly can in that tendon, because the mechanism of our therapeutic exercise is going to be, if we can increase the strength in that tendon, we're going to increase the capacity of it to tolerate load, which means it's going to better be able to handle what we ask it to do on a daily basis, right? So I think that's one, purely from a strength point of view in that example, is really important. And I mean, we can extrapolate that to, dozens of different examples for different musculoskeletal conditions. But I think also, almost just as importantly, if not more importantly, is the impact that exercise has on our nervous system. And the reason why that's so important is because all pain anywhere throughout our body is a production of our central nervous system. It's an output of our nervous system rather than an output or something that we actually experience at a peripheral level, at the level of our tissues. And so, because we know that pain is production of our nervous system, pain is so multifactorial, and there's so many different things that can influence it beyond purely our anatomical profile or pathological profile. And one of the biggest ones is we experience pain when our body is threatened. So when we're exercising, when we're moving, what that's doing is essentially teaching our body that, hey, movement and exercise is safe, which decreases the threat of our nervous system and decreases the likelihood it will produce pain. So sometimes it's not necessarily, okay, let's build strength because a stronger muscle or a stronger joint is going to be able to handle our day-to-day activities better. Sometimes it's actually, well, let's just move. Let's just exercise to teach our body that, hey, there's no need to be threatened by what we're doing. This is actually safe. This is not harmful. All of a sudden, our nervous system's inhibited a little bit and we feel less pain. It's interesting. You mentioned as well, if you're exercising, say 3 or 4 times a week, your scoliosis will generally feel pretty good. But if you're exercising 6 or 7 times a week, it might go the other way and you sort of might flare yourself up. Well, that's the challenge when it comes to exercise, is getting that dosage right.
Yeah.
An analogy I use all the time is, if someone's got a headache, a pretty common way to treat a headache would be to take 2 Panadol, and it's pretty well received that Panadol is a great medication for headaches, and it's going to help to take your headache away. But it's pretty easy to take 2 Panadols as the correct dosage, and the reason why we would take 2 is because if you took a quarter of a tablet, it's probably not going to do much. If you took a whole box, you might end up in hospital, right? And it's the same with exercise, except that often when prescribing exercise, it's a lot harder to get that dosage right compared to just taking 2 pills. So it's very important that we're not doing, too little, because we won't be gaining strength or gaining resilience or getting any therapeutic benefit of it. But at the same time, it can go the opposite way. When we're doing too much and we're under recovered, that can increase the threat to our body and increase pain that we feel as well. So therein lies the challenge with prescribing exercise, I suppose.
Yeah, that's also what I see. I think so I work outside of my like clinical job at the medical center, I obviously work as a kind of online personal trainer, kind of focusing on hypertrophy and strength outcomes. And the dosage is so hard to find, I think a lot of the time, especially I find it's easy in my more advanced clients, the clients who, they've been lifting for 6 years, they know what feels good, they know what feels bad. Or they know what feels like too much, and they know when they're kind of running themselves into the ground a little bit or doing a bit of junk volume. But when you talk to someone from more a general population standpoint, how do you kind of teach them about this is too much and what that means? Like, obviously, we in kind of the evidence-based crowd think of, we have intensity and we know exactly what that actually means. Like, that's either weight on the bar or that's proximity to failure. And then we have volume, and is that the amount of reps you're doing, or is that the number of sets, and all these kinds of things. But the general population person might not understand that. And how do you go about kind of maybe explaining those concepts in a roundabout way, or explaining, because I guess dosage is not just how much you're doing, it's also the intensity with which you're doing it. And how do you explain that kind of stuff to someone in general population? And is there any kind of things you've learned about that?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and it's obviously always going to be different based on the individual in front of you and what you know about them. I think for me, I've probably always got a tendency to try to prescribe the minimum effective dosage, which largely comes from a compliance point of view, because let's be honest, the vast majority of people will see rehab exercises as a chore or something that they've got to do, not necessarily something they're looking forward to. They're just something that's enabling them to be able to do the other things that they want to do, which is, lift weights or go for a run or play sport or whatever the case may be. So for me, I think minimum effective dosage is really important just from a compliance and a lifestyle point of view, which also is going to have the added benefit of, well, we're not going to be overdosing them, because essentially one of the first rules in healthcare is if you're not going to help someone, well, at least do no harm, at least don't hurt them. So the last thing we want to do is give people too much and you flare them up, and then they're cursing your name, and they're a lot worse. So trying to get that minimum effective dosage in terms of overall volume of exercise and rehabilitation for me is the first thing. But at exactly the same time, you mentioned intensity. I think a lot of people, especially when it comes to rehabilitation and therapeutic exercise, have a bias towards low level or low intensities of exercise. And they don't often strive to actually work really hard and achieve a good intensity and progressively overload as they would in other settings in the gym, for example. People often don't understand that if you want a stronger bench press, well, they need to progressively overload the bench press by adding reps or adding weight or adding volume over time. And I've got to sort of explain that with rehabilitation exercises, if we want to increase our tissue's capacity to tolerate load, if we want to increase our strength over time, if we want to actually get this issue better, well, we also need to be progressively overloading this rehab exercise. And the only way to do that is by performing it with intensity. So once again, probably like the start of our chat, James, I think a lot of it just comes down to education and explaining this is exactly not only why we're doing this exercise, but this is why we're choosing this many sets or this many reps at this intensity. There's always going to be a reason behind it.
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess one thing and this is kind of out of curiosity, I remember when I went to a physio years ago, they gave me and this is something I've talked with, I know you know Jacob very well, and I've discussed this with Jacob quite a lot. This idea of setting a flat kind of rep target. Like, let's say someone set a rep target of go do 10 reps for 3 sets. It's like us in kind of the evidence-based crowd, we can see some kind of flaws with that when it comes to, okay, then how does the RIR change? Do you end up reaching 0, or do you just end up failing the rep target and then you're outside of it? But do you discuss proximity to failure with patients, and how would you, is that something that comes up, or is there kind of a way you like to think about it or talk about it with patients that you might not say, hey, this is the RPE scale, it was formulated in 2008, blah, blah, blah. But how would you discuss that idea with patients, like proximity to failure?
I mean, if I'm training lifters, for example, I will discuss proximity to failure in their own training. But when it comes to rehabilitation exercises, I'm not necessarily all the time prescribing you need to be 2 reps to failure, you need to push this to failure, or this RPE or RIR. I think from a really simplistic and practical point of view, probably the biggest thing that I would find myself saying most of the time is this rehabilitation exercise that we're doing for reason X to help with condition Y needs to be at all times at least moderately difficult, because it's not at least moderately difficult, well, then you're not going to get a therapeutic benefit from it, and we're not going to actually be able to progress. So for a lot of people, something as simple as that is really important. And I've always got to really encourage people to say, look, if I'm prescribing you, exercise 1, exercise 2, and I'm seeing you in 2 weeks' time, I don't want you just to continue to do exactly the same intensity of that every day for the next 2 weeks. I want you to increase the load, increase the intensity in this way or that way, prior to seeing you next, rather than just having go through the motions and now it's easy, but you haven't really got much out of it for the last week. So I suppose, always making sure things are moderately difficult at a minimum, and making sure we're giving the people that I'm seeing the tools to progress themselves in, one of potentially several different ways prior to when they review with me next, and then I can help to guide them to take the next step.
Nice. That definitely makes sense. Yeah, because I think as you kind of touched on, like in lifters, it's a little different because there's a very concrete sense of, when you failed. But like, I think in like, if I was trying to explain to my mum, for example, proximity to failure, it would be a much different conversation compared to like my sister, because my sister lifts weights, for example. And yeah, it does change it quite a lot. One thing that I kind of have always wondered about this kind of stuff, and I'm assuming it probably changes based on what the goal is, because I guess in hypertrophy training, we think of frequency as, bouts of muscle protein synthesis, and how often can we stimulate that to the degree that it'll be productive. How do you think about frequency with injury rehabilitation? And is there like, what are like the most common frequencies you would work with? Like, let's say if it's a tendinopathy or something like that, for example.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's going to depend on the person in front of us and the different condition. I think once again, it comes down to, if I'm everything that I do, I like to think that there's a reason behind it. If I'm prescribing exercise frequency, well, there's a reason why I'm giving that frequency. And once again, it comes down to the education. So I'm going to explain to a client, if I want you to do an exercise every day, it's for this reason that I want you to do it every day, which is hopefully going to make them more likely to do it every day. Or if I want them to do an exercise every second day, it's for this reason that I don't want them to do it more often. Let's use a couple of practical examples. So might have a runner who I'm trying to build up as much calf strength and endurance as possible, and they're doing weighted calf raises as a rehabilitation exercise. Well, that's something that if they're pretty new to it and we're pushing the intensity high and they're still potentially running or playing sport at the same time, well, I probably don't want them doing that every day, because there's going to be a carryover of DOMS and fatigue, which is going to potentially flare them up or limit their progress. So, and some people may be super motivated and want to do more than I'm giving them, which is great as well. But in that situation, I'm going to have to hold them back and say, no, I want you to do these every second day or twice a week or 3 times a week. And it's for this reason, because recovery is so important. There are other conditions, and tendinopathies are a good example. Shoulder pain is a really common complaint that I see, and a rotator cuff tendinopathy is a really common form of shoulder pain. And that's a condition where your rotator cuff, as a general rule, is a relatively small muscle group, and it generally does recover pretty well within 24 hours. And when we've had tendon pain, often it can be pretty persistent and pretty chronic. So we want to have a high frequency to not only, one, get improvements in our strength and our capacity, but two, also be, like we sort of said, challenging our nervous system more often to sort of say, hey, this movement's actually safe, and we can decrease that sort of potential threat that our nervous system may be picking up. So in those sort of people, I'm sort of saying, look, I'm giving you exercises every day. I really want you to make sure we do them 7 days a week rather than 4 or 5 days a week, because that's going to allow you to get the best outcome. So once again, I think it comes back to, well, there's a reason why I'm giving you a specific frequency. Let's explain that to the client to make sure they're going to be, or they're more likely to be compliant with it.
And I definitely think in like if someone was just training for strength and hypertrophy outcomes, they would, like, something like 7 days a week would sound like crazy. It'd be like, what? And like, it's, that would be like that would become a fad style of training, like a German volume training or something. And like, yeah, I've seen, when I've had like good physiotherapists to work with me in the past, there has been times that they've been like, yep, do this every day. Cool. Why not? Like, and it's been, it's interesting to see when I myself coming from like this paradigm of like optimizing muscle growth and strength and nothing else matters. And then you begin to think more about, okay, but all powerlifters kind of joke about being in pain. Haha. not really ideal. One thing that I was kind of wondering about, and this is something where I have absolutely no idea, when you think about things like imbalances, and for example, we kind of spoke about my background in podiatry a little bit, and I have some podiatry knowledge still, but a lot of it is floated away. But when you think about something like imbalances, like for example, and maybe this isn't quite along the imbalance line, but if you think about knee valgus or pronation or things like that, how do you see those as leading to injury? And are they indicative of problems just because of the morphology? Or do you think that something like pronation or having a flat foot or knee valgus or whatever it is, what role do you see that playing? Is it no role? Is it 100% the cause? Or where do you see the kind of line there?
Yeah, definitely somewhere in the middle. So, I mean, to use those two specific examples, I mean, knee valgus is one that there is research to suggest that knee valgus, when the knees track inwards, can increase the risk of experiencing knee pain or even acute knee injuries. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that's always the case. There are people that do display knee valgus that don't get any knee pain or injuries with pronation, and this may be more up your alley than mine when it comes to the foot. But once again, according to the research, there is, I believe, a link between pronation and increased risk of pain and injury, but that's not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean that every single person with flat feet is going to be, subjected to a lifelong of plantar fasciitis and Achilles tendinopathy and patellofemoral pain, right? Another really interesting example in the world of physio is scapular control or scapular dyskinesis. When I went through university, we were told that, our scapular biomechanics, our scapular movement essentially has to be perfectly symmetrical. And if it's not, well, then you're going to get shoulder pain, which there is some evidence to suggest that's the case. But once again, there's people with shocking scapular control that get no shoulder pain. So I think when it comes to, these type of abnormalities, I suppose we'll call them, I think practitioners are great at identifying abnormalities, which is good, but often we can go a little bit too far in the opposite direction and sort of say, well, you've got these abnormalities, every single abnormality, for lack of a better term, we need to fix, because otherwise it means that you're broken and something's going wrong and you're not going to be able to achieve optimal physical health.
Yeah.
At a more practical level, it's going to come down to a case-by-case basis. Well, for me, if someone's presenting to me with shoulder pain and on an assessment they've got really poor scapular control, well, can we give one or two therapeutic exercises to change their scapular control? And if that does improve their scapular control, does that change their pain? And it may or it may not. And if it does, brilliant. We're going to keep going down that path. If someone's getting anterior knee pain, patellofemoral pain, for example, which is the most common form of anterior knee pain, and they demonstrate some knee valgus when they squat, for example, or when they run, well, can we actually try to coach this person to change the biomechanics of their squat or biomechanics of their running gait? If that changes their pain, beautiful. Well, then it's something worth worrying about. But if it doesn't change their pain, well, maybe we move on to a different contributing factor. Pronation, as that other example that you mentioned, I'd love to hear your point of view on this as a podiatrist. But for me, if someone's coming with, I gave a few examples before, some Achilles problems or plantar fasciitis or knee pain, and they've got, clearly an overpronated foot, well, will the use of off-the-shelf orthotics to give them a bit of arch support potentially change the way that they're moving? Does that change their symptoms? If it does, well, to me, it's a no-brainer. Let's use that as an intervention. If it doesn't change their symptoms, well, perhaps it's not the most important thing.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Like, that was what we would do. For example, if someone, okay, cool. If they're, and to be honest, with orthotics, they are pretty, it's interesting how well they work. It's like, if you think of something like plantar fasciitis, do you guys have form orthotics in Australia? I don't know if you guys would call
orthotics.
Yeah, they're like a very classic, very, very common orthotic. They're like those pink and blue ones. No, they
I'm not familiar, mate. I'm not sure.
No, but they those you just give someone a pair of those. Like, we have these, they were called like dual medium. You would give them a dual medium pair of form orthotics, and their plantar fasciitis, they'd come back the next week, and it would just be pretty much sorted. Like, I reckon 50% of the time. And obviously you would give them exercises and things like that. But it was interesting to see how well that worked. And I totally agree with this idea of, like, if it's a problem, 100% solve it. And it's like, maybe the morphology is playing a role there. But like, for example, I used to work at a shoe store where we sold like running shoes and things like that. And mums would come in all the time. No hate on mums, but they would come in, they'd bring their son in, and they would be like, my son has flat feet. Can we fix this? And I was like, oh, are you getting any pain? And he was like, nah, no pain. And I'm just like, bro, we don't need to fix this. This is not, we don't need to do anything here, you know? But the mum would want to spend $300 on the most anti-pronation shoes that she could find. But the son's not going to wear them because they're ugly shoes, to be honest. No hate to the shoe companies. But yeah, and I think it's just very easy to clickbait morphology, I think, and sell based on morphology. That was one of the main things I got really passionate about with podiatry was the fact that pronation could be this thing that you can just sell. And it's very easy to be like most of the high-end running stores sell based off telling someone they're pronating too much, therefore you should pronate less so you'll be a better runner. And I really like this. I saw someone talk about this the other day where it's like, okay, pronation is a really powerful movement and we shouldn't just try to eliminate it. Like everybody pronates a little bit, and yeah, everyone's very quick to just be like, that is bad, get rid of it. And yeah, but yeah, I haven't practiced as a podiatrist for a while, and I also haven't actually read too much research on this, but I think we were pretty I studied podiatry at AUT, and the course was pretty reasonable, I think, with sort of saying there's a balance, right? It's like pronation is not the devil, but it's also like can be indicative of a cause of an injury. Like if you're getting like as you said, like if you're getting plantar fasciitis, that was one of the big ones where it's like, okay, and biomechanically it makes sense. So it's not something we should just totally ignore. So I definitely agree.
I think at the end of the day, structure does not equal function, and structure does not equal pain. Sometimes it contributes to it, absolutely, but it doesn't necessarily mean we've got pronated feet. As I said, we're going to have to deal with plantar fasciitis for the rest of our life. You know, you mentioned your journey with scoliosis, and scoliosis is a great example where scoliosis is what we classify as an abnormality, once again, for a lack of a better term, with our spine, in terms of we've got a sideways curvature of our spine. And yes, there are people with scoliosis who can't do the things that they want to do. And yes, there are people with scoliosis who suffer with pain as a result of that. But at exactly the same time, there's a huge amount of people in the general population who walk around with some degree of scoliosis. And one, they may not even know about it, right? Because they've never had any issues, so they never got it investigated. Or two, they may have that diagnosis and they may know exactly about it, but they never actually get any pain and they've got great function. So therefore, that's just shows us, that's great evidence to suggest that, well, if there's any, structural abnormality or movement deficiency, for lack of better words, I'll sort of say that because, it's, if you sort of know where I'm going with that, these things aren't necessarily abnormal when a vast majority of people have them.
Yeah, the majority of people are going to have some, like we don't know what the neutral foot looks like. Yeah, because it doesn't exist. It's like the neutral perfect foot does not exist. And same thing with spines. It's like
posture is a great example of that. When I went through university and when I started practicing in new grad, we were sort of taught that anyone that's, if their spine wasn't in the perfect, sort of upright textbook posture, well, we needed to correct that because that causes pain. Well, the reality is evidence tells us that there's not a clear correlation between what we consider to be posture and pain. And once again, from a practical point of view, we know there's plenty of people with what you'd consider, aesthetically or visually poor posture, with that really rounded upper back and really rounded shoulders and chin poke out, and they get absolutely no pain. And there's people with these perfect, nice upright textbook postures and excellent physiques, and they get all sorts of aches and pains. So it's like, we've got to sort of see, well, are all these abnormalities? No. But are there times when they contribute to our pain? Absolutely. We've got to be able to determine when they are and when we intervene. But like you said, absolutely not intervening on these things if this person gets no pain or no loss of function, like the mum walking in with to the shoe shop with the kid with fat feet, for example, who has no issues doing anything that kid wants to do.
Yeah, it's and it was really it was pretty common. I do think on scoliosis, it's really interesting because, like, for example, my right shoulder is kind of rounded forward. Left shoulder seems to sit like in like the traditional perfect sort of space. And then like there's all these muscle imbalances. But say if I press some dumbbells, I can press the exact same amount on each side, yet one pec is literally half the size of the other. So it's really and even yeah, like there's all these imbalances when it comes to that, but I can produce force equally on both sides because I think I've just kind of adapted over time by moving a lot and producing force and all that. And it's really interesting to see that it doesn't actually, like, I'm sure if I wanted to be a world-class powerlifter, there'd probably have to be some kind of, and I could never be a world-class powerlifter because I'm not nowhere near strong enough. But like it's interesting how it hasn't actually affected my function that much. Although I do often wonder and don't feel the need to like have an answer to this, but I do often wonder like, because I had the surgery, and I do often wonder like, oh, because you see these people online saying, yep, you can fix that with exercise, and I'm somewhat doubtful of that. But yeah, that would, because then it's like, oh mate, you could have just not had the surgery. But I often think that the problem with some of these things is with scoliosis, and in particular, I do think there's a lot of people selling shit because it's such a, like, not to get too deep, but it does sap people's, like, for me, it's been fine because I live in like a first world country and whatever. Like, the government paid for my surgery. Shout out the government. But in like Egypt, they don't pay for it. So people are quite desperate around it. And yeah, people sell a lot of things based on it. And I think the parents often play a similar role to the like where when you've got the flat foot kind of story, because I was like 12 and most people are like 12 when it happens. And then the parents are kind of driving this narrative rather than the kid actually having any say. But I mean, the kid is kind of young, and like when I was 12, I was stupid too. So it's like, fair enough.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to sit here and try to say that your back and your pain and your function now would be any different, better or worse if you had surgery or not. I mean, that's an impossible question to answer. Obviously, I mean, one interesting point, you said that you could never be a world class professional powerlifter. I mean, one of the most famous powerlifters in the world, Lamar Gann, I think he was the first person to ever deadlift 4 times his body weight. Had a very significant scoliosis, one that's visually obvious to the everyday person, not just to health practitioners. Usain Bolt is another example, fastest man in the world. I think he still is. I don't know if someone else has overtaken him now or what, but he was. He's got scoliosis, right? So once again, these type of labels or diagnoses are not a death sentence to a life of pain and dysfunction. It's how you go about it, and as I said, I am biased towards exercise, and that's largely because of the research evidence, but also because anecdotally, I see people that are active, people that are fit, people that are healthy, people that are strong, have less aches and pains and function better than people that don't, especially when they're, I suppose, having to deal with a pre-existing issue such as a scoliosis for the sake of that example on a daily basis.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like, I think a lot of people might get this diagnosis and then think, oh shit, I can't exercise. Like, I made some YouTube videos talking about this, and I was astounded at how many people were sort of saying, yeah, I can't do any exercise now. And I'm like, you can go for a walk. And then what's the next level? And then what's the next level? Yeah. The reason I say I can't be world-class powerlifter is because, I'm built like a runner. I'm built like someone who should run half marathons, not lift weights, but I'm slowly changing that, slowly working on that. So yeah.
I think, sorry, just on that point, just one more little thing I thought was worthwhile adding. I actually saw a client about a month ago for initial consultation. He was a teenager, maybe 15 or so, diagnosed with scoliosis, went to his GP with back pain, had some x-rays, diagnosed with scoliosis. GP said, stop all exercise. He was playing a couple of sports at school. GP said, do not exercise until you go and see a physio. Luckily, he completely rested and stopped all exercise for 2 weeks before he saw me. And I was like, no, okay, it's really important that you continue to exercise. And this poor kid and this poor kid's mum had spent, the last fortnight, completely shattered, probably depressed, worrying, oh my God, what does this mean? Am I never going to be able to play sport again? Is this going to bother me for the rest of my life? Like, am I doomed to fail at everything that I want to do? And it's like, well, no, absolutely not. And I was, very lucky that I could be the one to reassure them and educate them and to say, no, it's going to be perfectly safe. In fact, it's actually highly advisable that you stay active and that you exercise and you play sport, for as long as you possibly can, because that's going to actually help with your condition. But I suppose the reason why I brought up that example is people think that they can't do certain things because they're literally told that. Like this kid, and this is not having a go at this kid's GP at all, because the nature of general practitioners is that they need to know a hell of a lot about a hell of a lot, and not be experts in one area. And a good GP will delegate, will refer out as much as they possibly can. So to the GP's credit, they sort of said, well, I'm not an expert. They gave advice, which, yes, in hindsight was poor, but they didn't say, okay, don't you ever play sport again. That's it, you're done. Go and see someone who may know a bit more about this than me. And a couple of weeks, after a couple of weeks of this kid feeling pretty crappy, we could sort of change his outlook on that. But there are people that are in that situation that do get told something, whether it's by a doctor or a physio or an osteo or a chiro or whatever, or even their personal trainer, that you shouldn't do something. And of course, they're going to believe that because if you're dealing with a professional, people seek the opinions of professionals because you believe that they've got more knowledge than you in a specific area, and you want to get their advice. So if they're going to tell you something, the vast majority of the time you're going to believe it. And if someone tells you not to do something, well, the normal human instinct is to say, well, if they're telling me not to do something, well, that must be for a reason. That must be because if I do something, I'm going to be way worse or something bad's going to happen. And they hold on to that. And that causes fear avoidance and catastrophizing, and can literally, increase the risk of chronic pain drastically. Yeah. So, I just thought that was an interesting anecdote that was worth bringing up.
That's incredibly interesting because, I there's two things here, right? Like in my own experience, like that's obviously what I've seen. The more I exercise, and I had that kind of fear of, I only really got over it in the last year and a half. Like if say, you know what a slackline is? Do you guys have slacklines in Australia? Like the thing it's like a little bungee cord you tie between two trees and you like balance on it, and all the hippies do it. It's pretty cool. I can't do it, but it's kind of like another example could be skateboarding, for example. It's like pretty unstable. And I kind of thought I couldn't do those kinds of things, but then, you get on and you try it, and then you try again, and then maybe you fall off and you're like, oh shit, I fell off, and I'm still intact. Interesting. And then it's like that slow progression of realizing, oh, I am functional. The only things I wouldn't do now is like I have been told you can't go on a roller coaster, or you can't go bungee jumping is the main one. Maybe fair. My shit might like come out of its socket, but hey, I'm not going to argue with that. I have no intention of doing that anyway. And I do want to note as well on the GP side of things, I totally agree. Like I don't blame the GPs at all, because I see the same thing with nutrition, where they might say, yep, everyone should go on a plant-based diet. Everyone should go on a keto diet, whatever the diet is. And I see that every day in practice. And a lot of them, I would say 90% are pretty good at saying, hey, it's not really my area of expertise. Go down the hall, talk to James. And like that, that is so good to see them taking that step. But I 100% agree that, it's, I think we do hold health practitioners in this kind of place of authority, and we probably should. But I do think, and I don't think we should necessarily, there should be a public campaign to make people more aware of this. But I think the quality in health practitioners can differ quite a lot. And no practitioner is all knowing, which, I don't know what we do with that information. Because I think it is good that people have trust in their practitioners. Like if we take physios, for example, if people had less trust, they would probably have less adherence. Therefore, it's less effective. So we probably don't want that. But it is interesting because,
I mean, I think having a level of skepticism is definitely useful, like you said. And I think if you're not completely trusting or believing in someone, or even if you just don't, if you just don't like the answer, well, I'm always encouraging people, when it comes to their health, to seek a second opinion. If the second opinion reinforces the answer that you might not necessarily have wanted to hear from the other person, well, you're probably going to buy into it more. If it takes you down a different path, then that's great as well. And I think on that, like you said about GPs and that sort of thing, and we should have trust in health professionals, but the reality is we don't know everything as much as we'd like to. I remember, I've been practicing as a physio for the best part of a decade now, and I remember being a new grad from literally my first day walking into private practice, thinking that I needed to know everything, and I was almost ashamed or reluctant to answer a question with "I don't know." And now I realize that's honestly the best thing that I can possibly do. If I'm not entirely sure of something, the best sort of value of service you can give to your client is to say, "Look, I'm not entirely sure. about that answer to your question or about what's going on here. But what I can identify is X, Y, and Z, and we can work on those things. Or what I can tell you is I'm not necessarily sure about this foot complaint, so go and see a podiatrist instead of me. Or I'm not necessarily sure about this hand complaint, go and see a hand therapist instead of me. And like we said, that's what really good general practitioners do, but it's what really good health professionals from any sense should be able to do is say, okay, this is my area of expertise. This is what I'm really good at helping you with. But if I can identify something that I'm not necessarily an expert in, well, then I'm not just going to say, sorry, I've got no idea. I can direct you to a person that will be able to help you, and we can work collaboratively. And people appreciate that, a hell of a lot. It's just like a personal trainer isn't necessarily going to say, oh, you've got back pain, I can rehabilitate and fix it. I can potentially refer you to an excellent, allied health practitioner who can help you with that. Same with me. If someone comes to me and, potentially one of the things that I'm recommending for the osteoarthritic knees is weight loss. Well, I can tell you that weight loss is going to be excellent, but am I the best person to help you with that? No. There's an excellent personal trainer I can recommend you to who you can work with to help that. And that team-based approach is going to be best.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I just think the closer we can get healthcare to that, the better. Like, I've been quite blown away with my job as a health coach. I've been working for like 3 months as a health coach, and it's quite nice because the GP will see someone with diabetes who says, yeah, I really want, like, they'll say, oh, diet and exercise would be great. And they're like, yeah, I really want to pursue weight loss, but it's so damn hard. So then they'll say, cool, go and see our free health coach. It's like game changing because they walk down the hallway and then boom, they can get the more specific care. And yeah, I totally agree. I think it's really hard I think the more and more health moves online, I think this gets harder and harder, but I think we will develop solutions to this eventually. Like, for example, online directories or something like that. And as long as I think it's really important that health practitioners network and make sure, like, you obviously have a really good network where it's like you've got the place you work at where you've got all these different personal trainers you can collaborate with, but then it's like you've probably got people around you where it's like, cool, if you need a dietitian, if you don't know the dietitian, you can go ask someone and they'll say, yeah, this is the dietitian you go to. Yeah, it's
correct. And that's, I mean, a referral or a recommendation is going to be far more effective. Well, I can say, oh, look, I'm not an expert in this, but I can send you to James and he's an expert in this. Go and see this person, compared to, oh, I just think you need to see a podiatrist or you need to see a dietitian, and you leave them with their own devices to do their own research. That's where things get lost and it can become overwhelming and results don't happen. But if you can, like you said, if you can network as a health professional and sort of say, look, I've got an excellent psychologist, an excellent personal trainer, an excellent podiatrist, an excellent, whatever it may be that I can refer you to, that's far more powerful, I think, when you build those relationships with people that you trust.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think this would be a good place for us to finish off, but is there anything else you wanted to, any other points that you feel as though you want to reiterate, or and I'll edit this out if there's nothing, but is there anything that you want to make sure is clear?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. What have we spoken about? I think, just then, as a look, I suppose if we're just sort of summarizing the most important things that we've covered, I think, like we said just then, don't be afraid to be skeptical and ask for a second opinion when it comes to healthcare. I think if someone tells you that you can't do something for a certain reason, we'll question why that's the case and delve into that a little bit more in a little bit more depth. If you've got a specific goal, something that you can't do, something that you want to be doing in your own life, and there's pain or injuries holding you back, well, I think for the vast majority of people, an active approach is going to be best for that. Yeah. And that's not necessarily just means, just go and exercise, just move, just go for a run, just lift weights, and that's going to fix all your problems. Deal with someone who can help to conjure up a plan that's going to be an effective therapeutic dosage that's going to help you building resilience, building strength through your tissues, decreasing sensitivity of your nervous system to allow you to achieve that. Because the vast majority of the time when it comes to pain or injuries from a musculoskeletal standpoint, an active approach and exercise is going to be the best sort of approach that you can take.
Absolutely. And yeah, this has been a really fantastic conversation. I always think it's so nice being able to speak to other practitioners where they've got a totally different area of expertise, but then there's some areas where that there's like similar themes and ideas. And it's really, really cool to hear. If people are looking to find you online, where can they go to find you online? And if if they are based in Melbourne, where can they find you?
Yeah, so my business is CB Physiotherapy. So you can find us on social media, Facebook and Instagram at CB Physiotherapy or www.cbphysiotherapy.com.au. So I do consult out of a couple of gyms in Melbourne. One's called JPS Health and Fitness, which I think a lot of your audience may be familiar with. Another one's called 3 Point Training, which are both, as I said, in my biased opinion, some of the best evidence-based personal training studios in Melbourne. So I do consult out of both of those studios. We do offer telehealth services now, which have become a lot more popular in COVID, meaning you can access physiotherapy consultations, education, advice, opinion, rehabilitation online, essentially from anywhere in the world as well. And all the details about that is on my website.